Welcome, everyone. So, my Dharma talk today is about the life of no regret. It's a text in the service that we recite daily and or weekly, however often you recite it. But we're going to look at the text and also what it means in our life and what it means in the Buddha's life and how his life has inspired all of us today. But before I start talking about it, I just wanted to say some things about the celebration that we're the reason for gathering this week. And this is a very special time. It's post Enlightenment, and interesting to think back roughly 2,500 years ago of the Buddha. And we know of the story of the Buddha looking for the answers to the question of suffering and how he became enlightened. And it's the first time actually that we've gathered after the Buddha's enlightenment. And so this is a nice opportunity for me just to sort of reflect on what happened after the Buddha became enlightened. And so in the sutras, there's several stories. And what's interesting is you sort of think of the man before he became a Buddha as an ordinary human being like you and me. And you sort of think of the Buddha attaining enlightenment, and that means that he's no longer a foolish being of wayward passions like you and me. Do you think he's a bamboo after he attained enlightenment? And a lot of the stories immediately after he attained enlightenment suggest that actually he was. He was quite arrogant. He had doubts about other people and their abilities to understand what he did. And he, so for example, it was probably about 7 days after he attained enlightenment that he got up and wandered from where he was sitting to Gaia, and he came across a naked ascetic called Upaka. And Upaka noticed how serene the Buddha looked, and he asked the Buddha, and he complimented the Buddha and said, "My, how serene and peaceful you look. Who is your teacher? Whose Dharma do you profess?" And the Buddha just answered quite naively, innocently, "Well, I have no teacher. I did it myself. I am the master. Look at me." And if anyone said that today, you'd think, oh, well, what an arrogant so and so, full of ego. And so did this naked ascetic. He just shook his head and said, "Well, that may be so, my friend." And he didn't stay very long to listen to the Buddha. He went his own way. And then afterwards, the Buddha then started to wonder, could people actually understand this abstruse teaching? He could see that a lot of ordinary people probably wouldn't have a clue about what he learned and what he discovered when he attained enlightenment. And he also thought he'd get annoyed and frustrated if people couldn't understand him. And so there was this sense that it wasn't worth his trouble. He'd just rather go and sit nice and peacefully under a Bodhi tree and just live out a nice, quiet, peaceful life. But then it said that the god, the deity, Brahma Sahampati, came into his mind and said, "No, no, 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 don't think like that. You mustn't, for the sake of all beings. You must go teach the Dharma, because there might be some with little dust in their eyes." And so the Buddha had a change of heart. And the other interesting story that we don't really hear too much about is, and this is when he first became enlightened and was sitting peacefully under the Bodhi tree, was that the very first two people to take refuge in the Buddha and in the Dharma were businessmen. Could you imagine just going around the world on business? You're just on your way back, you've bought some nice souvenirs from where you were, and then all of a sudden you come across this really peaceful looking sage and you offer him what you've got and he tells you what he's learned and you think, oh, that's pretty impressive. I'll take a bit of that home with me, thank you very much. And they ask him if they could have something of his so that they can go back and remember him with. And they felt inspired by his presence. They didn't stick around very long. I don't know, it doesn't seem like their encounter was very long at all, but it was enough for them to take refuge in the Buddha and take refuge in the Dharma. And there was no Sangha at that time, it was just the Buddha. And then they left and they went back to their home country with a relic of the Buddha, and they used that as their object of devotion. So there's some interesting things about the Buddha just after he attained enlightenment that show us that actually he's not that much different from you and me. And then a little later on, his close friend and assistant Ananda asks the Buddha. Now this is a few decades on after he attained enlightenment, and the Buddha's ministry has grown quite strong and large. And Ananda notices the Buddha sitting there quite peacefully, and Ananda asks a similar question to Upaka, saying, "Ah, you look very serene, you're radiant." And Ananda gives an idea of why this is. And this time the Buddha's answer is very different. It's not about, yes, look at me, I'm so great, I mastered it myself, and I am the cream of the crop because I figured this out all by myself. He actually compliments Ananda for thinking of this question. And he says, I'll read it out because it's really nice. "You have inquired thus, Ananda, for the sake of many people. It's for the happiness of many, out of compassion for the world, for the sake of the great multitudes of humans, for the good, the happiness of devas and humans, that you have asked the Tathagata about this matter." And his answer isn't about him anymore. The answer is about the rest of us who will benefit from Ananda noticing how radiant he looks, how lovely he looks, how shiny, and how peaceful. So there is something about the Buddha's presence that didn't change from the time he became enlightened to well on into his old age. He had the same serene look. He was at peace, even though he was aging, even though he still encountered difficulties in his life. The effect of the Dharma on him was made clear when he told Ananda that this is because he is in touch with the Buddhas. He is thinking about all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who have inspired him and who are still around to this day. So here we are, almost 2,500 years later, celebrating the teachings of this man. And he lived a life of no regret, and he's inspired us to do the same. And in our service book, this is where you'll find the text. The Japanese call it the Tanbutsuge. Tanbutsuge in English means the song, in praise of the Buddha. And it's a section in the larger Pure Land Sutra. So in the larger Pure Land Sutra, the Buddha also tells the story of Dharmakara, who's a monk. And this is someone that lived millions and millions and millions of years ago. And it could be in a different universe. It could be in a completely different world. And at that time, Dharmakara came across the Buddha of his day, called Lokeshvara Raja. And so the Buddha is also indicating that although he went through this torturous path to look for the answer to suffering, he actually didn't come up with this all by himself. He puts himself in this perspective of, well, before him, there were other Buddhas. And before that Buddha, there was another Buddha. And before that one, another one. And that a Buddha appears, or a Tathagata appears, for the benefit of all living things. So again, there's a sense that, yes, he did it all on his own, but the Buddha's putting this extra dimension. Did he really? When we think that we've done it all by ourselves, it's like looking at my children, and half the things they can't do by themselves, but most of the time when I ask them how they did it, they usually say, well, I did it all by myself. And I smile and I let them think that, okay, yes, they were able to do it all by themselves. They didn't get any help whatsoever. And I'm sure we were all like this when we were children, wanting to feel like we had complete control over everything, and that whatever we did, our successes were because we did it by ourselves. No one helped us. But then as time goes on and as we get older, we see that actually there's very little that we can do successfully all by our own efforts. There's usually a lot more that's helped us to do the things well. And so the monk Dharmakara, when he comes across the Buddha Lokeshvara Raja, is at a point in his life when he realizes that he wants to do so much more, but he can't without the help of other Buddhas. And the Buddha Lokeshvara Raja very much sets out a teaching of how to create a pure land. In other words, how to create a place where there's no suffering. And the Buddha Lokeshvara Raja says to the monk, you know how to do this. You don't need any help. You can do it. But Dharmakara says, no, I can't do it by myself. I still need some help. And so there's this sense of a nice relationship of Dharmakara feeling so inspired by the Buddha that he met, and the Buddha having faith that Dharmakara can actually do it and will know what to do. And Dharmakara then says, but I still need you to show me how. And in the text itself, there's two parts. The first part is very much praise to the Buddha, the Tathagata. It's almost like what I've been hearing when I've been able to dip into part of this retreat. There's a lot of people who are praising Dharmavidya's teachings, and Dharmavidya and the organizers and other people who've been involved in all the wonderful things that they've done in order to put this retreat together. And so there is a natural upwelling of wanting to praise that which we love, that which we admire, that which we respect. So the first part of it is looking at the Buddha as someone who has these amazing qualities and rejoicing in them. And then the second part is more of the aspiration, the vow that Dharmakara then makes, and it's more about what what his intention in his heart is. And we can even look at the text and think, well, what happened before? So, was a life of no regret something that happens after you live a life of regret? Because life is suffering. Life is, well, we're born into a world where we're faced with all sorts of challenges. And a lot of what we come into is a more material relationship with the things and the world around us. And I can think, even a year ago, mm, no one would have imagined that their whole careers and jobs would be lost because of a virus. And there's so many instances of suffering that actually reveal to us that life is a spiritual affair. And the material world, in a way, distracts us from our spiritual life. And it shows up in how we grasp for things, we want things because we like to feel that everything is permanent. We like to feel that everything is reliable. And I think in this past year, we've seen how so many institutions, so many organizations, so many industries have just collapsed because of a virus. So many things that people put a lot of effort into making into something solid and permanent so that their lives could have this sense of stability have just fallen away. And when this happens, when the things that we've taken and put refuge in fall away, then we feel the suffering. And there's been so much of that lately. And it just seems like it's going to carry on for a little while. And the Buddha teaches that if we actually put a lot of energy and effort into trusting and having confidence in things that are impermanent, then we will suffer. But if we don't, if we can find a refuge that's reliable, that's permanent, then no matter what happens, we'll be able to handle it calmly, peacefully, like he did. So, in the Buddha's own life, from the time he was born, he experienced suffering. And even though the story says that he was sheltered and he lived a life of luxury, the fact that he lost his mother when he was a baby and that she died giving birth to him was a suffering that he had to live with. And even at a plowing festival where he witnessed the insects being killed in order to plow the land was another instance of him experiencing the suffering around him. And when he then went outside the palace walls and saw the different kinds of suffering, he felt it. And he, you could say that at that point, he was struggling. He was struggling to find um, a way to live with all of this. And I can say in my own life that up until I came across Buddhism, I was also searching in a way, struggling in my own way. And I could categorize things into regret, regret over things that I did that harmed people, friends, family, and regret over the things that I didn't do. So, and I think if we think back over our life and what happened up until the point where we came across Buddhism, either through a book that we might have read or through teachings that we heard or actually meeting a Buddhist teacher, there's a sense of relief when you come across Buddhism, the Dharma, that teaches us that life is suffering and that's a noble truth. So for me, there is that feeling of euphoria, that that sense of, oh, here's a teaching that matches my own experience of life. And that brought a sense of great relief. And from that time, I've kind of lapped it up, and I still am. I still think there's so much that I can see that I do that I think, "Ah, if only I could have a second chance." So there's that feeling. Up until I came across Buddhism, there is a sense of things going wrong and wanting to make things right and wishing that I could have a second chance at it. And there's still that every time um, especially with my children, so many times I yell at them and get mad at them, and then I think, oh, okay, we'll try again tomorrow, and I'll try. Thankfully, they are creatures that have no choice to stay with me, so they always give me another chance because they have no one else that will actually look after them. But in my heart, I just think, no, I'll have another go at it tomorrow. I'll until however old they are, there's a sense of, well, thankfully I know that I'll have another chance. The Buddha has given us all another chance. So the life of no regret, well, I guess the question then becomes all the things that happened up until we came across Buddhism, are they really regrets then? We wouldn't be here if we hadn't done the things that we did or didn't do the things that we could have done. So the fact that I'm here because of everything that went wrong in the past is actually not not strictly speaking things that I should regret. Because if I did things perfectly and if everything went really well and I had the sense of spiritual communion, then I wouldn't be here today. So there is this sense of everything that happened before has led me to get here. But if I had another chance, if I had another try at it, I would make sure that I didn't go through exactly the same things that I went through. And so the start of the life of no regret, the sense of, and I'll just talk from my own experience now, of being in the dark and then receiving some light, some warmth, and that sense of relief, of gratitude, then leads to wanting to rejoice in what we see. And so Dharmakara is now rejoicing and praising the Buddha, talks about what the Buddha looks like, and then goes into the qualities, namely the six paramitas. And the six paramitas, um, they include dana, generosity, not just of material things. I think at Christmas time, as it's coming closer, everyone's thinking about buying gifts and presents, but really what the Buddha is talking about here is generosity of spirit. Can we be generous to another person in a spiritual way? Can we think about what they need and give it to them without them having to ask us, without them having to actually give us any idea or hints? Can we just naturally open our hearts, think about what another person needs, and offer them without expecting anything in return, without wanting anything back, without even needing to be thanked or praised or to be given any kind of um, any kind of praise back, so that it's just done in a free way, a free gift, which comes as grace, of course. And then we have sila, the precepts. And the precepts aren't really a set of commandments. They're not something that the Buddha was choosing to do and to act in order to be morally superior. They just came from him having a loving heart. It just flowed out of him. So for him, it was easy to act in a way that showed others that um, they were they were respected. They his actions were of someone who was noble. And what I find so interesting about the precepts and about other Buddhist teachers and saints is when they talk about themselves, they often say how difficult it is to keep the precepts, how hard it is because their minds are still um, consumed by greed, hate, and delusion, but their actions speak otherwise. And I think the the, the paradox of acknowledging the reality of all the human emotions and the things that go on and the ability to accept them but not act on them, I think is what I find in a lot of the great spiritual teachers. The sense of they're not caught up in their own need to have certain things so they can let those feelings come and they can see them go. And then Kshanti, patience, just taking everything in his stride, not rushing to get to the goal, but just to carry on practicing, just putting one step in front of the other. And in the larger Pure Land Sutra, um, there I've already talked about the conversation between Dharmakara and Lokeshvara Raja, and Dharmakara saying, "But I need your help. I can't do this by myself." And Lokeshvara Raja then says, "Well, it's as if a man were to bail out the great ocean with a ladle. In principle, one should be able to reach the bottom and find great treasure. If one has such unfaltering perseverance, surely there is nothing that should not be attainable." And patience is very much about just being happy to ladle out one scoop at a time without even worrying about whether they've got the treasure. And so the Buddha is able to have a vision of this great um, vision of a pure land and is not bothered by getting there or not bothered by having it now. It's very much about just carry on having faith, trusting the act of what you're doing, and eventually the fruits will bear in time. And virya is energy. And with all these qualities, there's an object. What are we putting energy into? And the Buddha teaches that, well, we're putting energy into letting go of the self, trying to get the self out of the way. And the best way to do that is by taking refuge. If all we can do is to take refuge, then that's enough. If the energy goes into having to puff up ourselves, having to build our own little empire, and then putting energy into trying to destroy it or change it because we're not happy with it, then we're wasting our time. If the energy can go into finding that refuge that's holding us all the time anyway, putting our effort into taking refuge there, then we're using our energy in a good way. And then prajna. Prajna is seen as the best of the best of all the paramitas. This is the one that is held up at the very top. So I'm not going to say too much about it because there's a lot about it. But I like how it fits together with learning, energy, meditation, wisdom, and amazing virtue. So there's a certain kind of wisdom in knowing that, well, we're bamboo, we're a human being, we're filled with wayward passion, and we can't build a pure land on our own. Um, And but if we can um, listen to the teachings, if we can learn what we can do, if we can put the effort into uh, learning different meditations to help us let go of our selfish ways, then it can bring about the best kind of wisdom. So it all kind of fits together. It's like different bits hook onto each other so that they form a nice whole. They're not sort of separate individual things. Okay, today we'll work on wisdom, and tomorrow we'll work on Dharma, tomorrow, the other day we'll work on patience. It's sort of like once we have a way in and we start to put our effort into one, it'll lead to all the others. Unfortunately for us, because Buddhism has been around for such a long time, and the Buddha himself was very good at teaching lots of different kinds of meditations and practices. We have a great storehouse of different kinds of meditation and practices, but they all point at the same thing. They all teach us that there's no true self. This isn't me. This isn't mine. This isn't myself. But sadly, we are the sort of creatures who like to feel special. We like to feel unique. And we don't even realize that we're creating our own burning hell every time we do something to separate ourselves out as someone unique and special. We just can't see it. Other people are better at seeing us create our own burning hells, but we ourselves are blind to it until it gets to a point where it starts to feel very uncomfortable and hot for ourselves. And then we think, oh, what have I done? And so the Buddha also uses this analogy of where the self is like a stick, and everything that rubs up against us is another stick. And what we tend to do most of the time is rub these sticks together to generate heat and fire. And a lot of the meditations teach us how to let go of our stick so that there's nothing to rub up against the world around us. And if there isn't anything creating the heat, creating the fire, then our minds can become calm and peaceful. And when our minds become calm and peaceful, they become bright and pure and adaptable. And the ones who have mastered that do have a nice, serene, radiant shininess to them. It's like people that you see with a bit of a twinkle in their eyes. You know that they've got something. They found something, so they can stay lit up by this experience that they've had of knowing something more than most of us do. And this I guess this consciousness, this mind that's pure and bright and adaptable, it's not to say that there's never any feelings or sensations that are pleasant or unpleasant, but it comes up and they can see it come up and then they can see it go. So they don't add another spin on it. They don't hold on to whatever feelings come up, and they don't get carried away by them. And so the Buddha compares the mind to be like gold. Have the use of a very rare and precious metal like gold is a very good analogy. Is gold in its pure form, it's malleable, it's ductile, it doesn't break, it's not brittle. It's one of the least reactive chemical elements. It's very solid, and in its standard form, it comes as a piece of solid gold. And so, whatever situation one finds oneself in, with a mind that's like gold, will be adaptable. Whatever one is required to do in that situation will always be beautiful. And then we move on to the second part of the life of no regret. And this is about aspiration, determination. And it's very clear that there are so many sentient beings who need saving, like countless as sound grains. And since the time of the Buddha, I mean, humans have just kept multiplying and multiplying. So if they're innumerable back then there's even more now that need saving and taking to the other shore. And that's that's a big task. So there's a great story about Kuan Yin, and Kuan Yin, she's a bodhisattva of compassion. She goes around and she saves people from the hell realms, and she's busy. She's going around, she's saving everyone, and she's tired after doing this for so many days that she takes a break because she thinks, well, I've done enough now. I've saved so many sentient beings. I'm just going to take a break. And then after a little while, she goes back and she looks down at the world, and she falls apart. She can't believe it. There's like queues of people now waiting to get into the hell realms. And she thinks, oh my word, how is this possible? And so she shatters into 1,000 pieces. And Amida comes, sees poor Kuan Yin broken, defeated, and puts her back together again. And as he does so, he puts an eye of wisdom in each of her hands so that she can go forth with compassion, but also knowing when and how to help most skillfully, so that she doesn't fall into despair again, so that she doesn't feel defeated by this task. And then this aspect of knowing that there's so many people, countless number of people that are out there wanting to be, or not wanting, they probably don't want to be saved at all, but who are unwittingly setting up a hell realm for themselves to fall into. In the second part of the life of no regret, I think my favorite line is, by sheer power of aspiration, I'll fill them all with light. So the starting of just aspiring to want to do something, to bring light into people's life, to dispel the darkness, is enough. There's something very powerful about having that in one's heart. And then the Dharmakara goes on to make a vow. And again, a lot of times when we make a promise, and thinking about this year is ending, a new year is about to begin, it's always a good time to think about one's New Year's resolution. And often it is about, I'm going to do it. I'll go to the gym every day. I'll work out. I'll lose that extra weight. Or I'll be kinder to my family. I'll be kinder. I'll be a little bit more generous and thoughtful. A lot of it is, I'll do it. It's about me and what I'll do. The Dharmakara, when he makes his vow to save or to lead all beings to the other shore, Dharmakara makes his vow with the help of the Buddhas. So there's a sense of the Dharmakara is not going to do it on his own. Dharmakara is placing his faith and trust in all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas so that it's not him alone, but he's going to draw on the strength of the giant shoulder, the giants who came before him. And together with other Buddhas, it's more achievable. And the last little bit is, I suppose, where Tai Chi comes in, because we know that in this life, there's always going to be hardships. There's always going to be storms. We can't control the external events that have happened, the virus, the environment, the economy. There's so many things that are happening now that we're witnessing, and we can see them as storm clouds that are there hovering in the sky. And I think the ordinary person, the ordinary mind, takes a storm cloud and then fills the entire atmosphere with it. This is a terrible time, and they're suffering, and they can't see any way out. And we just tend to feel that there's nothing good anymore when we're in that dark space, when we see the storm clouds, when we feel that there's very little that we can do to change the conditions to make the clouds go away. And so this practice is about acknowledging that there are storm clouds, there will be hardships. But if we remember that there's also light, there's also Amida's light. It's like there's the sun is still there somewhere in the sky. And every now and then, when you have the sun and the clouds together, you see a rainbow. And it's that beautiful rainbow. It's very simple. It is. It's 7 colors that just magically appear when you have the right mixture of light and clouds. And you can't touch it. If you're in it, you can't see it. But when you're at a distance, you can see it. And sometimes you see it filling the sky. And it's an upside down frown. It's not a smile. And yet it's so beautiful. And that, I think, is the best image that nature can give us of the feelings that happen when we live with Amida's light and the suffering in the world, because it isn't all wonderful. We can't be smiling all the time. But to have a sad face and a frown in the colors of a rainbow is probably one of the most beautiful and poignant images that can fill us with that bittersweetness, that quality of yugen. So we can hold both. We can hold the tears and we can hold the love. And there's a wonderful story, I've shared this before, about this village up in the mountains, and it's very dry. They don't have a lot of water, and they have to walk down the mountain to a spring in order to get their water. And they have a couple of people who are responsible for going down and getting the water. And it's a hard task. It's not easy. And they go down and they get it. And one of them always arrives with a full bucket of water. The other one, their bucket isn't very strong. They're not strong. They always lose quite a bit of water along the way. And the villagers, of course, they always get angry. they're frustrated with this water carrier who's unable to actually come back with a full bucket of water. And the the person who is also the one who loses water also feels very badly and thinks, oh, why have I been given this task? And they're just ready to give up and to run away. And Tai Chi is the bodhisattva of creative power. Tai Chi is the bodhisattva who's able to transform our suffering and dukkha into little pure lands, into some form of beautiful, um, uh, something beautiful, something wise, something wonderful. And so the villagers complain to the leader, and this leader very much has a spirit of Tai Chi. And the leader then talks to the person who's ready to give up and to leave the village because everyone is so frustrated and angry and disappointed in this person. And and the person is in tears, is ready to walk away. And the leader says, "Well, look at the beautiful flowers that have sprung up from where you've walked to get the water to our village. And the whole path is now filled with beauty." So Tai Chi is able to take something so awful and horrible and change it into something very creative and beautiful.